It's time for the Phil Ferguson Show.
This is Phil Ferguson, and you are listening to The Phil Ferguson Show. And I haven't done this in a long time. I'm putting out a show only days after my last show, and it's being driven by the fact of who I just interviewed. And you'll hear, of course, the interview later in this show. I have the opportunity to interview a United States Congressman, Jared Huffman, who was one of the founders of the Freethough Caucus in the United States government. Yes, there is actually a Freethought Caucus. A year ago, he won the Emperor Has No Clothes Award from the Freedom from Religion Foundation. And I finally was able to get him to agree to a time to interview and discuss all kinds of things about politics, religion, a little bit about investments, but mostly politics and religion and their intersection. And it's fascinating to hear him talk about how he has become more and more clearly vocal on the problems of religion and politics. And this is going to melt your heart. You're going to love this interview. He gets really into it midway through, and we need more of this. We need a lot more of this. We got some fucked up shit in this country, and we need people like Congressman Jared Huffman to be on the job, using science, using reason, using common sense ideas, and, as he said, not the Book of Revelation as your guide to international politics. So you're going to love that. Hang on, you're going to love that. The other thing that I'm doing in this show is I'm restarting, going back over what I guess I'm going to call now the Polaris Plan. This will be part one in a multi-part series. I often get emails, people saying, I hear all these little ideas in your show, and you talk about your style, your plan, your investment stuff, but where is it all collected in one place? And I did this about a year ago, but it's time to refresh and redo. Today's segment, Polaris Plan Part 1, will give an overview, kind of a frame of reference, a starting point of how to think about your plan. And then in future parts in the following episodes, I almost said weeks, but the following episodes, hopefully a week, give or take, I'll have Polaris Plan Part 2, 3, 4, however many I think I need to go into the details, where I will give very specific fund names, fund symbols, and if not necessarily the percentage you should use, the relative percentages maybe that you should use in your portfolio. And a lot of it is squishy. And the big problem I have, and I even discussed this in the segment following here on Polaris Plan Part 1, it depends. It depends on you. And so there's a lot of stuff you have to have, almost said soul searching. There's a lot of thinking you need to do about your situation. I cannot, in good conscience, give a blanket recommendation of this is what you all should do. It depends. Depends on you. Depends on your age. Depends on how conservative or aggressive you want to be. It depends on the intentions of your funds. Do you want to spend it all yourself before you die? Do you want to give as much as humanly possible to your descendants, nieces and nephews, grandchildren, or charities? What is your goal? What is your objective? What is your tolerance for volatility? And all this stuff is really, really important. And so I'm going to talk about concepts, ideas, ranges. I guess not any personalized investment advice, because nothing I give should be considered personalized investment advice, at least in the format of the podcast, but investment ideas, things that maybe you can utilize and go learn and use for yourself. And since we're starting off with Polaris Plan Part 1, and I didn't mention it in the segment, so I'm going to mention it now. There are 4 books. 4 books. If you could see, if I was on the YouTube video, 4 books, 4 fingers holding up. There are 4 books you should read. And I've talked about it before, but I'm going to go over them really briefly here, and you should read them in order. The first one is Richest Man in Babylon. Really basic stuff. Really easy to read. It is not woke. So it's got some issues with feminism and slavery in the content because it's over 100 years old. I know. If you think of something better, let me know. But it's good, really good on the concepts of money. So, Richest Man in Babylon. The next book is Random Walk Down Wall Street. Yes, I almost forgot. Random Walk Down Wall Street. And all of these books are old. I'm very conservative, dare I say this, in my investment philosophies. I really want to stick with things that I am sure work. And when you come up with a new idea, you have to show me with evidence and historical performance that it's going to beat what I'm already doing. That's a hard bar to get over. And so I don't like books that I read a lot of them that came out 1 or 2 or 5 years ago and have this new way of doing it. I try to read a lot of that stuff because sometimes I learn things. But as far as long-term investment advice, things that have proven to work, books that have held up for 30, 40, 50 years are fantastic. And A Random Walk Down Wall Street is one of those books. And the nice thing is it sold so well, and it continues to sell so well, that it's updated on a regular basis. There are some parts of it that are dated from the late 60s, early 70s, but most of it keeps getting updated. Again, A Random Walk Down Wall Street. That'll help you with a lot of the terms of what investments are, how investments work, et cetera, et cetera. Once you've completed that book, the next book is called Winning the Loser's Game. And this talks about why index funds are the shit. Why index funds beat not index funds. Winning the Loser's Game talks about that. Absolutely fabulous. Now, all 3 of these books, you can listen as audiobooks. You can read them on Kindle. You can buy the physical hard copy. I don't care. And I don't care really how quickly you go through them, but don't rush yourself. The first one, Random Walk, is actually available free on YouTube. For a couple of hours, you can listen to somebody read it to you. The other ones are a little more difficult and challenging, particularly if you're new to the material. The 4th book, which I consider to be my Bible, my investment Bible, is Common Sense on Mutual Funds, written by John Bogle. Now, it's not as old as the other books. It was written in the 90s, and I think updated around 2007, 2010. That's the version you want to get. Even the old version works great, but the updated one, and I really hope that at some point somebody updates it, even though, unfortunately, John Bogle has passed away. John Bogle is the founder of the Vanguard Mutual Fund Company. He is the creator of the very first index fund. He is the powerhouse behind the industry of index funds. And this book, I insist that you get it in paper. I don't know if it's available in paperback, but hardback, paperback, whatever, $20, $30. Are you fucking kidding me? Just pay the goddamn money. This could make you a lot of money. Read that book in paper form. Spend time on it. This is not a Harry Potter novel. This is not a John Grisham novel. This is not something you want to read over one night. I think the audiobook version is like 16 hours. And you can do the audiobook version after you've bought and gone through the physical book if you want. I know I have, because sometimes it gives me show ideas. But you want to treat this as a textbook. Study at home. Take your time. Read a section. If you haven't read the other books, this book can be difficult to digest and process because it's got a lot of very complicated stuff in it. It has a lot of graphs, charts, tables, statistics, mathematical formulas, things that sometimes just don't make sense in the Kindle version because you need the layout. The book layout is what you want. The Kindle's probably okay, but really, please buy the paper version. Take your time. This may take you 3 months to get through. It may take you a year or more to process this book. If you're in your 20s and 30s, you have a long, long time to invest. Invest some of your time in reading this book. Of course, after you've read the other books. So those are the books. I'm again, rambling on. It's going to be a really long episode. Jared Huffman is coming up as an interview. And, of course, the Investing Skeptically segment is the Polaris Plan, Part 1. So already going to be a really long episode. I know you're going to enjoy it. And, again, thank you for listening. And we're going to take a little quick break and get into the really good stuff.
But I don't think you have to be a religious person to have good values. So the way I see this is I'm going to start where you started, and that is I believe everyone should be treated with respect. As I said, for me it is a basic value. Every human being has value, and that means every human being should be treated with respect. And that's true whether we're talking about black or white, straight or gay or trans, whether we're talking about old or young. I think this is really an important part of who we are. And if I can, let me just pick up one, although you mentioned several, but I think maybe it may be the one, since you mentioned it first, is the question about abortion. I understand that you and I may have differences. There may be a lot of different views in this room. But here's what I'm certain about, and that is a woman who's in the position of trying to decide what she's going to do about a pregnancy that she may not have planned for, may not have hoped for, may have been forced upon her, is a woman who should be able to call on anyone for help. She should be able to call on her partner. She should be able to call on her mom. She should be able to call on her priest or her rabbi or her pastor. But the one entity that should not be in the center of that very hard decision is the federal government. That's how I see it.
This Investing Skeptically segment is basically going to be the start of a multi-episode series, kind of like what I did last year. And last year I called it Asset Allocation Part 1, 2, and 3. And it was kind of the best summary at the time of a lot of my investment thoughts and philosophies kind of all strung together, because often I just do small segments. And so sometimes people will listen to the show and say, do you have a book? Which would be nice, and maybe someday that'll happen. But how do I get everything that you want us to do all together in a concise, short little thingy? Well, I don't have something like that, which is, shame on me. But again, if you want to go back to August and September of last year, shows 313, 314, and 315 are the best existing thing so far. But because I've had so many requests, I am going to start and do this again with some updated numbers for you, because my thoughts sometimes change year to year, and sometimes I'll go a couple years without really changing anything, but things have been pretty dynamic lately, so I think it's worth doing a whole new update. So some of the basic things to start with, and I guess I'll call this the Polaris investment plan, the Polaris strategy, Phil's strategy. I'm open to ideas. If you have a clever naming convention that I should adopt for the overall, 50,000-foot view of what I do, please send me an email, phil@polarisfinancialplanning.com. The most important thing is, when is retirement for you? And I don't mean what year, although that's important, but how many years from now? So if you are looking at 15 years or more from the year or the date of your likely retirement, you don't really need the cushion. You need stocks. You need stock index funds. So I guess really, really fundamental stuff is I use virtually exclusively, maybe completely exclusively with some rare exceptions, Vanguard index funds. Now, there's a couple of reasons. One, it's historical because they were the first to really do these things right. And so I've been using them for a very long time. There are other companies, Fidelity, perhaps Schwab, which may at some point be a recommendation conflict potential for me because TD Ameritrade, who I use currently, is being acquired by Schwab. But other companies have index funds that you can use. Fidelity now does, and maybe others do too, Fidelity now does break up the U.S. stock market in a way similar to what Vanguard has done with large cap growth and value, mid cap growth and value, small cap growth and value. And their expense ratios are really low. I don't know if they work quite as well, but the differences may be so small that it doesn't matter. But I don't want to get too much into that right now. Like I said, the real important thing is how many years to retirement. The next thought is how much money are you going to need in retirement from your portfolio? I mean, so if you are used to living on $35,000 a year, and you know that you're going to get $35,000 a year from Social Security, maybe because you're retiring at 70 and you put a lot of money in, then your portfolio, you don't really need much from it. As an example, my parents, my mom and my dad, when they retired, and of course they both worked part-time in retirement just for fun, I guess. They didn't really even need the money, but they lived very conservatively, way below their means. And with Social Security for my dad and for my mom, and a little bit of money on the side, working part-time jobs for a while, they really didn't need a whole lot of money out of their portfolio. So my parents were able to maintain 90% of their money in stocks up until their deaths around the age of 81. That's not for everybody, but it does illustrate the problem is that knowing what part of your portfolio should be conservative, or in the cushion that I call it, it's hard for me to say this is the percentage you should use. If forced, if I want to give a really easy answer, I might say something like 30 or 40% of your portfolio should be the cushion. Maybe the right number is 50% if you're really conservative. Maybe it's 20%. But in my parents' case, it was 10%. And that's not for everybody. The most important thing is the ratio of what you spend versus the size of your portfolio. Because quite honestly, if you spend less than 2% of your portfolio, you could have it virtually all in stocks because stocks pay dividends, and those dividends are going to be there. So when you are starting to look at retirement, you want to figure out, it's all about your budget. What is your budget going to be? Are you still going to be paying your mortgage, which I'm actually fine with, and I know other advisors aren't, but if you have a big portfolio, who cares if you're still paying your mortgage? Doesn't bother me at all, especially while interest rates are 4% or lower for a home. So that's the first thing that you need to know. When are you going to retire? How many years from now is it? Then the next question is, how does one ramp up to building the portfolio? Historically, I would start about 12 years out, but because we've made so much money in the last 11 years, almost without a break, there have been market corrections of 15% or more a few times. And earlier in 2020, of course, we had a giant 30+% correction, which then came right back, which is a little spooky and a little scary. And it provides a nice opportunity for you to reevaluate what you're doing. So if you are 14 or 15 years from retirement, you should probably start filling up the cushion. And I'm going to move forward in this discussion on this episode and future episodes, assuming that you need 30% of your portfolio in the cushion. And how one figures that. Let's take a look here. If you have $1 million portfolio, and assuming you're going to take 5% out, that's your goal. That's what you need to get by, $50,000. Now, you might have a rental property that brings in some money for you. You might have a pension. You might have, land that you rent out to farmers and you make a little bit of money on it. You might have a pension from a former employer, either you or your spouse. But from your portfolio, the stock and bond investments, you want to take out 5%. And in this case, that would be $50,000. I'm assuming you're retiring somewhere around 62 to 65, 67 years of age. And the reason that is important is that if you retire younger, I generally recommend only 4%. If you retire older than 66 or 67, you might actually be able to get away with 6% or more. As an example, if you retire when you're 80, unfortunately, your life expectancy is now shorter than it would have been at the age of 62. So if you take out 10% from your portfolio starting at the age of 80, it would last 10 years if you make nothing. If you don't make money, you don't lose money. You could take out 10% for 10 years, and that gets you to the age of 90. I don't think we want to go that extreme, but if you took out 7%, it's going to last 10, 11, 12, 13, maybe 14 years, even making no return. So even if you're taking out more than your portfolio grows, if you're old enough, if your life expectancy is short enough, you can take out materially more money than maybe you thought. On the other hand, if your goal, like my parents was, to leave as much money as you can to your descendants, you probably 5% is the cap, and with a little luck, you can take out 5% in perpetuity, and your portfolio can grow and become even bigger over time. And the ideal situation is you're taking out 5% or less, and your portfolio is growing 5% or more on average. So again, back to this 30% thing. If your 30% of your portfolio is the cushion. And again, in the cushion, which I will go into more detail on that in another segment, your goal is relatively conservative investments. And so right now, I am very shy, very against, not interested in long-term bonds. I don't have a whole lot of interest in high yield or junk bonds. I do use them. I do use junk bonds and international bonds as a small part of the mix. And again, that'll be in a future segment on the cushion. So I'll do an update on that. But the purpose of the cushion in general is safety and security. You want it to be there. And so if the stock market goes down 20, 30, 40% and does not bounce back like it did in March of 2020, you don't want to be in a position of selling stocks when they have fallen 20 or 30 or 40%. You want to be able to have bond dividends, which are really low, stock dividends, which are also really low, and then the ability to sell some of the bonds. And this is something where people often get tripped up, where they think they should never sell anything and only live on dividends. This is a very big fundamental issue in the psychology of retirement, because it encourages people to invest in things that pay 5 or 6 or 7% dividend. If you are buying an investment, a bond, or some other kind of investment that's paying a 7 or 8% dividend, I'm very concerned about that. That is very, very hard to do. You, in today's environment, really safe short-term government bonds from the United States government are probably going to pay you 1 to 1.5%. It's not a whole lot of money. That's the really safe stuff. One of the ways I give people to think about it, if you have a 4% loan on your house, 4% mortgage, would you be willing to go to your bank and refinance it, even though maybe rates are now 3.5%? You go in and say, I want to pay 8% mortgage. Of course, that's nonsensical. And I bring this up as an example to point out to you how nonsensical it actually is. Why would you pay 8% interest on money that you're borrowing if you could get it at 4%? And that is the very question you should ask about any investment that promises to pay you an 8% dividend. Why in the fuck would a company, a limited partnership, an oil interest, whatever it is you're putting your money in, why in the fuck would they pay you 8% if they don't have to? Why are they doing that? What is their motivation? Because if they're a relatively strong and safe company or investment, why don't they go get money from banks at 3 or 4 or 5%? Why do they pay you 8%? Not to mention that they have to fuck around with collecting money from hundreds, if not thousands of investors, filing all kinds of regulations and tracking all that shit. They're out all this extra effort, all this extra money just to pay you a ton of interest. Are they doing that out of their own personal generosity? I'm willing to bet no, they are not. I'm willing to bet that whatever they're doing is not appealing to a bank that looks into the details, that knows how financials work and how investments work. And the bank said, hey, no thanks. We're not interested in the risk profile of this. And we won't even take an 8% interest from you. You're going to have to go sell it to people on the street who don't understand the risks involved. And they'll think that 8% is enough. That's something I have in the back of my head. And maybe I'm wrong. And maybe some of those investments that pay 8% actually work out. And sometimes they do. I'm not real interested. And if I am interested, I want to keep it as a very small, 5% max of my cushion, because the cushion is supposed to be for safety. If you want to take a flyer on some weird investment, count it as part of not cushion, especially if you're close to retirement. So always be thinking about, why is someone paying this much money? What's in it for them? How do they make money? Everything from online real estate investments. Very trendy thing right now is, what do they call it? Private placement REITs, which can be problematic. Direct investing real estate. Master limited partnerships where you can actually invest in oil and gas pipelines that pay ridiculously high dividends. All these things we've talked about before on the show, and I can talk about them all again. Junk bonds, which might pay 8 or 9 or 10%, again, because they have to pay 10% to get money from somebody. And often, it's another interesting thing, on initial offering of a junk bond, if the broker dealer that you're working with is the underwriter for these bonds, there is no legal limit on how much they can make underwriting those bonds. They might make 10% on the markup. They might make 20% on the markup. There's no way for you to know unless you ask them and they clarify it. If they act as a broker, they just get a fee or a commission. But if they are acting as the dealer, they are selling them from their inventory. Unless they fully disclose it or you require them to disclose it, you may not know how much money they're making. And so you can be way behind the curve. Again, I'm getting off. So basic things, index funds. Vanguard or somewhere else, index funds. Incredible broad diversification. Incredibly high tax efficiency, because if you have some of your money in a taxable account, you want to pay as little tax as possible. Pay your fair share, but no more than that. You want to figure out your budget, your retirement budget, to figure out what it is going to be in retirement. And then just a quick example again with this 30% of your money being in the cushion as a theoretical. If that 30% is paying 2% dividend, that $300,000, you're going to make about $6,000 from that. If the stock portion, $700,000, is paying 2% dividend on average, sometimes in the past it's been way more, and it might even be a little bit lower than 2%. So these things vary over time. That $700,000 can pay 2%, or about $14,000. So 2% on your entire portfolio is 20. But remember, you wanted to live off of 50 or 5% of the portfolio. So you make $20,000 from dividends. If you can live on $20,000 out of the million, you could really go pretty close to all stocks, but we're not doing that scenario. So if the stock market falls a lot, then you need to sell something. And this is the part which is news or kind of weird or different or freaks people out sometimes. But if you're making $20,000 from dividends, that means you need to sell $30,000 of something to come up with a total of $50,000. If you're at the end of a calendar year like 2019, where the stock market went up 30+%, it's real obvious where you want to sell from. You want to sell from the stocks. And it's really easy to figure out which ones to sell from. And topics we'll go over is the granularity and the clarity of my plan, where you can see exactly what you own by asset type, meaning bond versus stock, international bonds versus domestic bonds, international stocks versus domestic stocks. And these things all go up and down at different times and in different amounts. And if you're adding money, whatever has done the poorest, the worst performer is where you add the money. When you're pulling money out, whatever has done the best is where you take out the money. Right now, in late summer of 2020, the thing that has done the best, and this may blow your mind, right now is the large cap growth index for the United States market. 20% up year to date. In 8 months, it's up 20%, while the overall stock market is about even. This segment, large cap growth, has made 20%. If you're now taking out some money, in my mind, that's the ultimate place to take out money right now. So you look at all these different investments that go up and down at different times. You want this volatility. You want the assets to be uncorrelated to a point. The most uncorrelated asset is cash because it does nothing. So everything else goes up and down, and cash just floats along as cash. But we don't want to invest for the purpose of avoiding volatility. In some of the portfolio, we want and we encourage and we welcome volatility. Because if something is up and everything else is down, you sell from the thing that's up. If you're adding money, as you're approaching retirement, whatever has done poorly, you want to add money. And this creates a systematic approach where you are constantly buying low and selling high. I mean, we've all heard this phrase. We know what it means. It's straightforward and it's simple, but it's so hard to do if you do not do it in a systematic way. So your goal is to not figure out what's going to do well, because who the fuck knows that? I don't know that. And that's one of my strengths, is admitting I don't know the future. I am not going to give you an answer of what the market's going to do over the next 6 months or 2 years. I can pretty reliably predict what it's going to do in 20 years, but that's a whole nother segment. So you want to add what's underperforming and remove from what's overperforming. So right now, in late summer of 2020, if you're in retirement, if you look at all the granularity, all the different investments that you have in your portfolio following my system, I am recommending that you take money out of the Vanguard Large Cap Growth Index Fund. It's up 20% in the last 8 months. This is on top of more than 30% last year. This is on top of 11 years of this index fund overperforming. What a great time to take out money. Maybe it's the winner next year. Maybe it's the winner over the next 5 years. We don't know. But we have to kind of play the odds, because sometimes things change. Sometimes small cap stocks do way better. Sometimes value stocks do way better. Sometimes international stocks do better than domestic stocks. Sometimes bonds do better than stocks. A bond making 1 or 2% looks really stupid and really boring until every stock is down 25%. And then positive 1% looks goddamn genius. So if you're in a position where all stocks of every kind are down, now you pull from the bonds, because even though they're not up much, or even if they're just at zero, that's where you want to pull money from. So in this 30-70 ratio, if all stocks, domestic, international, everything that I recommend that you have money in, if all of them are down, and even if junk bonds, international bonds, intermediate term bonds, Ginnie Mae bonds, if all of those are down, then you look at the really most conservative of conservative things, short-term government bonds and or cash, which are part of your portfolio if you're close to or in retirement, and you pull money out of there. And so if you made $20,000 in dividends, you might have to sell $30,000 in bonds. Now, your bond portfolio is smaller. That's true. And that really concerns people, and it's something you should pay attention to. But if your bond portfolio is $300,000, you can sell $30,000 in bonds for quite some time. Almost 10 years. It's not quite 10 years, because as you sell bonds, your bond dividends go down in total dollar amount. But some of your bonds might pay 2 or 3 or 4%. So the 2% was a conservative way of looking at it. And of course, there's a more complicated way. I have a big fancy spreadsheet where I calculate all this. If you have enough bonds, you can do that for 10 or 12 or 14 years or longer, maybe even in perpetuity if you put it all in bonds. And you take out a small enough amount, again, being earlier, retiring at 55. taking out 4% or 3%. So it's all about this balancing, because you want to make more money in the stocks, but the volatility is clearly a lot higher. And you want to protect yourself from the short-term needs that you might have in the next 1, 2, 5, 8 years. And so you want to make the cushion as big as necessary, but as small as possible. And the driving factor for that, in my opinion, is not your age. Maybe your risk tolerance isn't a factor, but it's your budget. How much money do you need? How flexible are you with that need? Is the $50,000 that you're taking out not necessary? Is your budget $70,000 or $100,000 in total? Let's say if your budget is $100,000 in total and you have $50,000 coming from other places and then $50,000 from your portfolio. Could you for a year live on $70,000 instead of $100,000 if everything goes down? If that's the case, you could take more risk. Not that you necessarily want to, but you could. And so these things make it a very personal thing, and which is why when I'm compelled or feel the need to give a basic, straightforward answer that everyone can use, this 30 or 40% of the cushion is something I'm going to say because it's probably not going to blow up on anybody. But if you have only 10% and you need that money every year, absolutely must have it. If you only have 10% in the cushion, you could create a problem. And so that's some of the thoughts on the most basic fundamental things. Index funds, low costs, low taxes where possible in taxable accounts. When are you going to retire? How many years from now is it? How much money will you need in retirement? If you don't know, and I get a lot of this, and it's often people that are making pretty good money, they don't even know what they spend. You got to figure that shit out. That's maniacally important. And that's not something I can do for you. It's something you have to sit down and look at it. Not only what is your budget now, but what will your budget be in retirement? And if retirement is 20 years from now, that's going to be really hard to calculate and guesstimate. So start with assuming you're going to need 100% of the money you have now. Then maybe you can live on less, which means that's great. If you need more, you can adjust up a little bit as you go along, but it can be harder to spend more money than you have, because at least you can't do it for a long period of time because you're going to run out. Other considerations: do you want to spend down all of this money? Do you want to leave it to descendants or charity? So all those things come into thinking, things you can think about. So that's kind of a general overview of the, I guess, Polaris Plan for now, until I come up with a better name, or you come up with a better name and send it to me. And of course, if you want to have some more discussions about this, and of course, if you want to hire me, that's part of why I do this. It's for the business Polaris Financial Planning. You can contact me, phil@polarisfinancialplanning.com. So we're going to call this the Polaris Plan Introduction, Part 1. I don't know. I guess Part 1. The Polaris Plan Part 1. There, it's formal. It's been decided. And I'll go into Part 2, 3, 4, maybe 5. I don't think I need more than that in the future. But this is the start. And so hopefully this helps. Let me know what you would like me to discuss or include or clarify, and I can come back in the following segments and fix it. The Phil Ferguson Show is for educational purposes only. Nothing said on the show should be interpreted as personalized investment advice. Your investments should be based on your situation, and you should consult with your financial advisor before taking any action. The show may contain ads. These ads are placed into the show by the hosting company after I finish recording and editing. I have little control over the content of the ads, and you should not assume that I support their products or claims. If you choose to support the show via the new Patreon page, that support does not create an advisor-client relationship.
You're listening to The Phil Ferguson Show.
All right, everybody, welcome back. And now I have with me Congressman Jared Huffman. How are you today, sir?
Well, I'm well. Good to be with you, Phil.
I'm so delighted you could join us, and I know you have a very busy schedule, so I will try to give all respect to the time here that we can. And you are where? You're in California?
I am in Marin County, California, just north of the Golden Gate Bridge. hunkered down and riding out this pandemic like everyone else.
Or what they call the second district of California?
It is. Yeah, it goes from the Golden Gate Bridge to the Oregon border.
Actually, I think it was 1 year ago, my wife and I drove from Seattle down to San Francisco. So you certainly came through part of it, yeah. We sure did, and we got to see some sequoias, which has been a life dream of mine, so I was very excited about that.
Yeah.
I had about 2 hours where I just sat on a bench surrounded by sequoias and did nothing else. That was pretty spiritual for me.
The big trees are just amazing things. We've lost, well over 90% of them, but what we have is guarded and protected with a lot of passion.
Well, I did notice doing a very small amount of research on you, forgive me, that you seem to be very into environmental topics.
I am, yeah. I love rivers and fish and critters and mountains and open spaces, and it's a big passion of mine and a lot of the work that I do in the Congress.
And it's an interesting thing that sometimes that seems like it's an actual battle to do the good things for the environment. Can you tell us a little bit about your adventures and what you've done?
The main battle is people that want to make money in very irresponsible ways. I mean, the environment, I believe, can sustain us if we're very careful about it. But we've got a lot of repair to do for years of mismanagement. And going forward, I think we've got to be very, very thoughtful. We've got to take this fossil fuel industry out and literally convert it to a clean energy industry of some kind, or just get them out of the way, or we're going to lose this planet.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm actually in negotiations or getting bids right now to put solar on my house, which is not necessarily a short-term financial wise decision, but I think it might be the right decision.
Good for you, and great minds, Phil, because my solar was installed yesterday.
Very, very nice. What size system did you get? Do you know?
I don't know what size it is. I'm on a north-facing hill that's kind of shaded, so they had to put in a little bigger system than they normally would to make it pencil out. But I think I'm on track to have it pay for itself in 6 years. And you're a financial guy. I think that's pretty good.
That is getting on the very good side of things. I had done it for myself, and it looks more like I have east-west roof, so it's more like 8 or 9 years. But the thing I was really surprised and delighted to learn is that if you sell your home within a few years of installation, you basically get 100% of the net cost, because there's a lot of rebates and allowances for solar, which hopefully we can continue, and maybe that's something you can promote in the Congress when other chaos is not going on.
Yes.
I do know that one of the main reasons I wanted to talk to you, and again, thank you for being on the show, but you started a thing called the Freethough Caucus in the House. Tell us about that. What is it? How does that work?
Well, the Freethough Caucus is my idea of a counterweight, if you will, to all of the encroachments of religion into public policy that we see. These folks that want to drag us down the slippery slope of theocracy, weaponize religion, and have it permeate our foreign policy. We're in terrible retreat on genuine human rights and religious liberty around the world, and instead we're pushing these bizarre Mike Pompeo, biblical prophecy-driven policies, and of course anti-LGBT and anti-women's reproductive choice. The tentacles of that thinking have reached into our foreign policy, our national security policy, and of course they're everywhere in our domestic policy. And I felt we needed a bulwark to fight for the separation of church and state. It is absolutely under siege.
Yeah, it's actually a relatively frequent topic, unfortunately, of my show, because I see it as a very grave problem. I've had on many authors talking about how these ideas, which are kind of on the edge of reality in a church setting, but when they apply to government, they end up creating very bizarre systems and processes. You mentioned a few, international relations. I know there are some that are pushing for the end of Israel by supporting Israel. There are people who want to take away women's rights, and there's people who think that God will protect you from coronavirus. And any thoughts on that?
Right. It really would be great to take the book of Revelations out of our foreign policy. It's a pretty dangerous thing. If people want to believe in all that privately, that's fine. I really do respect personal choices. But to support Israel because you want to see it go down in a blaze of glory in the Battle of Armageddon, that's really creepy and dangerous stuff. And, Israel should be wary about that kind of support.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that California has been struggling recently with coronavirus, as has the nation. How do we get the average American to be more science-minded and less reliant on Revelations or other parts of the Bible? Any strategies on that?
I think we're just going to have to beat the drum of science and use these unfortunate incidents, like the Herman Cains of the world,
yes,
who was one of those magical thinkers that is no longer with us because the virus bats last. And I think the more people are sort of sobered up by those examples, and the more we don't indulge the silliness that is being spouted on Fox News and by this president, the more we defend people like Dr. Fauci that are speaking the truth, we'll break. There will always be a residual of, probably 20% of our country that through deep ignorance, magical thinking, or whatever, won't be there. And we're going to be living through that when it comes to the point when we eventually have a safe vaccine. You're going to see all manner of problems there too.
Well, the funny line I think I came up with, maybe someone else said it first, but there are people who are actually worried about Bill Gates putting a chip inside of the syringe, inside of the vaccination, and almost every single person that's worried about being tracked by a chip is not paying attention to the fact that they're carrying a cell phone with them 24/7. So look, the ironies and the disconnects and the cognitive dissonance abound. If you think that God will protect you from the coronavirus, why the hell do you need an assault weapon? Yeah, I've seen that many times. I'm afraid to go to the grocery store and I need to carry 3 guns, but I'm not going to bother to wear my mask because it just doesn't make any sense. I don't know what to do with that. Separation of church and state, obviously, I think it's fair to say, is a big issue of the Freethought Caucus. What successes have you had so far?
We engage in lots of different ways. So you might see us submitting amicus briefs to the Supreme Court, and you know how this Supreme Court has been on religion. They're terrible.
Yes.
So I can't pretend that we've had major wins, but we're fighting on the right side of many of these religion-related cases that come to the Supreme Court. We are fighting in the appropriations process to make sure that taxpayer money does not go out the door in ways that promote religion. And one example of that, people probably don't realize, but in the area of addiction treatment, substance abuse, a huge problem in this country, obviously. Many of the 12-step programs that folks have to go through when they get a DUI or when they are otherwise, put into the treatment system are very full of religious dogma. And taxpayer dollars, in many cases, are supporting that. So the Freethought Caucus has been trying to disentangle the religion from essentially a critical public service that's publicly funded. It's a great example of the need for that separation between church and state right there.
Absolutely. I probably over a year ago had on an author about a book about Alcoholics Anonymous and how it is no more successful than chance. It works like a placebo. So we do need science-based methodologies, whatever those are, because I'm not an expert in that field, but based on the reality on the ground, not a 2,000 to 3,000 year old textbook. So I'm in full agreement there. What about education and Betsy DeVos? What are your thoughts on her involvement and our funding of vouchers?
She's certainly a wrecking ball when it comes to the separation of church and state, and we all know her ultimate goal. It is to siphon off as much public money from our public schools, which she actually has disdain for public education, and she wants to see it go over to private and religious schools. That is the holy grail, the vouchers that would enable full taxpayer funding of religious schools. And we've just got to fight her every step of the way. Now, she's terrible on all sorts of other things, from Title IX to sexual assault and any number of things. This is probably the least qualified and the most destructive Secretary of Education we've ever had in this country. Gosh, we're going to be celebrating the departure of a lot of really rotten folks in about 100+ days, but she's right up there.
Oh, from your lips to God. Oh, wait, we can't do that. But one can hope. The other one, of course, I'm hearing currently discussions, and this has been around for years. For whatever reason, it seems that some Republicans want to dismantle our post office, our postal system. Yeah. Did they pass in the past, and maybe you weren't in the Congress at that point, some rule that requires the U.S. Post Office to pre-fund 100% pension of new employees? Am I recalling that correctly, or is that not the case?
You are. Yeah, it is a one-of-a-kind pre-funding requirement that applies only to the Postal Service pension. I can't remember the number of years out that they need to pre-fund it, but you would laugh if you heard it. It is like 50 or 70 years out that it has to be fully pre-funded. And that's why you see, on the face of it, this terrible deficit with the Postal Service. So if you take away that pre-funding requirement, and there actually is bipartisan support to fix that. It was not, I've heard various accounts of how it came to be, but some believe it was actually an unintended consequence of some sloppy legislation. In any event, if you fix that, it is a much more manageable situation. The Postal Service, it is true, is delivering a lot less standard mail,
right?
But they are delivering a lot more packages as everybody moves to this online economy, and that's a pretty lucrative part of their business right now. So don't believe Donald Trump. As usual, he has no idea what he's talking about when he says they're losing money on Amazon. They're making money on Amazon, and we need to support them, I believe, and modernize them and help them be a competitive 21st century delivery agent. It's the most popular service in the entire United States government, if you look at polling.
Absolutely.
And it's been around since the founding of our country. It's the one federal agency in the Constitution.
I know that I consider this the closest thing to a miracle, that I can put a little sticker on an envelope, and within a day or two, it arrives virtually anywhere within the United States for, I don't even know, what is it, 55 cents now? It's amazing.
Yeah.
I think that's the most amazing thing. So are you quite optimistic that Trump is going to be out, or is that just the line you've got to toe because you're a Democrat? What are you thinking?
No, here's the straight scoop from me in terms of my crystal ball.
Yeah.
I'm pretty confident that this is going to be a sweeping landslide election in the against Donald Trump and in favor of Democrats, probably at every level. But I am also 100% sure that he's going to contest the results and try to stick around.
Yeah.
And so I think we are in for a real moment in the history of this country. And I can't tell you exactly how it unfolds, but I am 100% confident that there will be that effort, at least by Trump himself and those in his immediate orbit to challenge things.
Another random turn here. Do you happen to know who Ray Smock is?
No.
Oh, okay. Because on the Wikipedia page for the Freethough Caucus, he was quoted, and happens to be a relative of mine, and so I was kind of freaked out to see him quoted on your Freethough Caucus page. Let's see, another thing: racism and Trump. Is Trump a racist? Are you willing to stand up and say that's the case, or what do you think?
Well, you'd have to be deeply naive not to think he was a racist. Of course he's a racist. He reveals his racism all the time.
Yeah.
He's also just a craven opportunist. And so, I can't tell you exactly on a scale of 1 to 10 how racist he is.
11?
But I can tell you, as an opportunist, he's a 10. And sometimes he sees opportunity, political opportunity, to animate this strange base that he has through either dog whistle or overt racism. And so that's it's a feature, it's not a bug of the Trump presidency.
Well, I think I was reading that recently there was an appropriations bill for the Department of Defense, which I think happens every year, and it's just shy of $1 trillion. And a lot of complicated things in there, pros and cons. It's too big, it's too small, it doesn't do this or it doesn't do that. But the one thing that Trump's upset with is that some of the bases are going to be renamed because they're named for Confederate generals.
Yeah, he's going to the mat for the Confederate battle flag, for these traitorous Confederate generals that literally committed treason against our country to defend the institution of slavery. And he's just badly misjudging this, in my opinion. When even the Pentagon is starting to get a little bit woke and saying that they're going to rename Fort Bragg and these other military bases, when NASCAR is finally getting rid of the Confederate battle flag, and the NFL and the sports teams
I was just going to go to the NFL. Yeah.
Kneeling is in. Trump is out. So I think he still reckons that he can excite this diminishing pool of rabid supporters that he has. I think it's down to somewhere in the 30% range, and he figures by keeping them excited and maybe eking out an election day win in the states he needs to hit 270, even though he's going to lose overwhelmingly on mailed-in ballots. He can then call the mailed-in ballots fraudulent, declare victory on the election day, and hope that the military and the Congress will let him get away with it.
Well, fingers crossed. And I know one of the things that I've asked my listeners to do is make sure they find at least one person other than themselves that they can get registered to vote while there's still time. What else can the random listener to my show do to help in this process?
Well, that's the big one. I mean, this is just we cannot accept anyone who sits out this election. It is by far the most consequential election, I believe, in our country's history. So we need to not only win, we need to win big enough, so that all of these dirty tricks and unbelievable anti-democratic efforts that I am predicting, so that they just can't happen, so that Trump will not have any credible ground to stand on in the days after the election.
What are your thoughts on gerrymandering?
Yeah, my thoughts are that California has gotten it right. We got rid of political redistricting, and we now have a nonpartisan independent commission that gathers every 10 years, takes a look at the census data, and has a very specific set of rules that it has to operate by. It has to try to keep communities of interest intact. It has to try to have coherent districts that are as compact as possible, that keep city and county government lines intact to the extent possible. So there's all these very specific rules. And what came out when we did this the first time, about 10 years ago, is very rational districts. And we're done with political gerrymandering in California. This used to be a real Republican theme, by the way. They used to always want these independent redistricting proceedings. Now what they've seen is that in fair districts, Republicans don't do so well. So all of a sudden they're against it. It's a socialist plot, and so we'll have to fight for this. But it's still deeply popular. The American people love the idea of independent redistricting, and it is the best way to get rid of these terribly gerrymandered districts you still see in places like Texas and Georgia and Wisconsin.
Yeah, Pennsylvania, North Carolina. The list goes on and on. One other thing that I did want to get to is you have called yourself a non-religious humanist. Is that the current descriptor you're going with, or have you embraced the A word?
That's not a bad one. I call myself all kinds of things. Sometimes I call myself a jealous agnostic because although I have broken with religion and am a non-theist, I do miss some things about being religious. I miss, having that community of like-minded fellow humans. I miss having an articulated set of values that are shared with a group. And for me, humanism has filled some of that void. Not all, because, you just don't have any congregations of humanists that I know of, and it's not held together the same way as religion is. But you do lose something when you part ways with religion, and that's why, I continue to be really respectful of other people's individual faith choices, and I'm careful about how I characterize my own. I don't want to judge them, and I don't want to convey that I lack for spiritual curiosity or a desire to have that kinship that religion offers.
Sure, I understand. And I think, was it last year you talked or spoke at the Freedom from Religion conference in San Francisco?
Yes, I do remember that.
Yeah, I couldn't remember if that was a year or 2 years ago. It seems so far away now.
I think I made some bad joke about liking the group so much that I was looking forward to burning in hell with them for eternity, but I can't remember the exact joke.
Sure. Are there any other political things, contemporaneous things that we haven't touched on that you want to make sure we cover?
Gosh, you've spread the field here. There's a lot going on. I guess the one thing that might be of interest to you and your listeners, we have concurrent crises right now, unlike anything that I can remember, and even a lot of historians can't remember a time when so many crises were layered on top of each other. We obviously have the pandemic, the worst in 100 years. We have the climate crisis that was with us before this hit and didn't stop being with us. We're not talking about it as much, but it is rolling right along. And then we have this moment of racial reckoning where the murder of George Floyd and other horrific acts of police violence has really forced us to confront our original sin of racism and to go much deeper into systemic reforms than we have in previous kind of episodic moments of awakening. So that's a lot. And then we have an economic crisis, of course, that's been brought to us by virtue of the pandemic. So the common thread in many of these things, I think, is that religious and magical thinking can get you into trouble if you're not paying attention to real facts and science. So you certainly see how that played out with the pandemic. Donald Trump was getting it wrong from the very beginning because he wanted to wish this away and he wouldn't listen to the science. Obviously, with the climate crisis, that's happening too. With the systemic racism, you know that the institution of slavery was sort of brought to us and defended for many generations on the basis of religion.
Indeed.
And the cruel reality of it was obscured by some of that just wrong magical thinking that God wanted us to subjugate our fellow human beings. So I think there are all kinds of common threads that are consistent with the messages that I know you convey on your show, and I want to thank you for that. Thank you for being rational and fact-based and a critical thinker.
Well, and I can't really think of a better way to end than that beautiful summary of all those things that are problems and why we need to focus on reality and facts and science. And unless you have something else, because we can talk all day, it's up to you. But I do want to thank you very much for being on the Phil Ferguson Show.
Well, thank you, Phil. And I've never spoken to a non-theistic financial advisor, so this is new territory for me. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Take care.
And he's right. It is a miracle. Except when you think about it, it's actually not. It's science, which I'd argue is actually better and more convenient than a miracle, because you don't have to spend the next 2,000 years worshipping the scientists. You can just be like, thanks. and while...
You're listening to The Phil Ferguson Show.
I hope you enjoyed all of that as much as I did creating it or being involved in the creation of it, interviewing Jared Huffman. Absolute delight. I am so honored that he was able to spend some time with us. And hopefully you didn't hear the construction noises a little bit at the very beginning. I think I took care of it. We had a post for our porch. Was exposed to too much water and rotted out a little bit. And it turns out that it is just about as difficult to get a carpenter to your house as it is to interview U.S. congressmen. So it happened at the same time. And I dared not reschedule the congressman. And I dared not want to reschedule the carpenter because it might be 3 weeks or a month before I can get back on his schedule. So they happened at the same time. So if you notice any of those sounds, my apologies, but I think I took care of it. Anyway, great episode, a lot of content. I am very excited to be able to share this information with you. Hopefully you enjoy it. If you do, if you find any value in what I do at all, please go to patreon.com/Phil and contribute. I'm only asking for $1 per show. If you're getting value, if you like the content, if you're mildly amused by some of my profanity, investments and profanity all mixed together, you can go to patreon.com/Phil, $1 per episode. If you wish to be really generous, the top tier is $6.66 per episode. I would love to have you help at that level. And again, it's per episode. So if I ever get to go to Italy and I skip a week or two, you're not out anything. You only pay when something comes out like this incredibly long and hopefully very enjoyable episode. The other thing, of course, you can do is recommend the show to your friends. I get a lot of new listeners on a regular basis saying, hey, a friend recommended, and now I'm going back and listening to every episode. I can't even hardly imagine doing that because what are we 351? This is 351. That's a lot of shows. I've been doing this many, many years, and for the most part, I still enjoy it. So that's good. I like to do things that I enjoy. If you have questions about today's show, want to send me an email, phil@polarisfinancialplanning.com. Oh, I got distracted myself. You can go leave a 5-star review at Apple Podcasts or on Spreaker. Send an email, like I said, phil@polarisfinancialplanning.com. Please do not send any confidential information. Of course, I'll have your email and your phone number because you're going to send me your phone number so I can call you. But don't start with any statements, Social Security documents, Social Security numbers, your bank account numbers. Don't do any of that stuff. People have been really good lately. Thank you, thank you, thank you. If we talk via phone, I'll call you. If we end up talking and you still want to talk more and you want me to review something, then is the point where I can look at it. I can look at your portfolio. If you're using some brokerage firm and you don't even know what your investments are, I can give that a quick once over. A lot of things I'll know by looking at them far quicker than you would what they are. And if I see anything that's a piece of shit, I'll tell you. If I see something that's pretty good, I'll tell you. It's not a problem for me. But obviously the show's long, so I'm going to wrap up. And again, thank you so much for listening. I greatly appreciate you being here for part of this adventure. And hopefully at some point we have conferences again, secular conferences, and I look forward to seeing you out on the road. Until then, ciao.
control, so pay attention, it's essential. This ain't no front hug zone, you ain't that fly, you ain't my Jones style. And listen, no front hugs and no kissing. I ain't that scared to call your mama, you'll be riding home in a coma. I got my crew, you ain't got nothing. Follow these rules, yeah, cause we ain't bluffing now. You ain't no rabbi, you ain't no priest, so rise up off me like the showbread with no yeast. Now, don't use that front hug, boy, that makes it awkward. That's inappropriate now. You back up awkward cause we wanna keep our minds pure, wanna keep away from sin. That means it's you too, girl, all people all around it. Give me that Christian side hug, that Christian side hug. Give me that Christian side hug, that Christian side hug. I'm a rough rider, filled up with Christ's love. Give me that Christian side hug, that Christian side hug. Give me that Christian side hug, that Christian side hug. Give me that Christian side hug, that Christian side hug. I'm a rough rider, filled up with Christ's love. Give me that Christian side hug, that Christian side hug. We be walking like, we be talking like, we be side hugging every day and night. It's how we do, boo. This ain't no club, so don't be hating on me when I show them love. We living holy, it ain't no thing. So put your hands in the air and let that shoulder hang. I'm going global, cause you don't know me. I'm buying babies like Angelina Jolie. So put that hug in and slow down, mama, and hit my fist like President Obama. Now, Democratic ship in the Congress, free book. Democratic ship in the Congress, free book. Democratic ship in the Congress, free book. Give me that Christian side hug, that Christian side hug. Give me that Christian side hug, that Christian side hug. I'm a rough rider, filled up with Christ's love. Give me that Christian side hug, that Christian side hug. Give me that Christian side hug, that Christian side hug. Give me that Christian side hug, that Christian side hug. I'm a rough rider, filled up with Christ's love. Give me that Christian side hug, that Christian side hug. I'm a married man, you know I can't hold hands. Front hug all day long with no other demands. But I ask for all of you until you say I do. No front hugging or PDA or your EG time is through. But some of y'all are slick, try to pull this trick. Your hug starts from the side, but soon it turns legit. So if you end up here, then go ahead and scream it. When I hug people, I leave room for the Holy Spirit. If a girl walks up with her arms spread wide, and she's front hug down without looking her eyes, you better turn to the side, pat her on the back. Jesus never hugged. Buddy like that, screaming. Give me that Christian side hug, that Christian side hug. Give me that Christian side